He was a hard-working detective trying to catch the infamous serial killer.
Back. Look at me, look at me.
Every mother was terrified due to devilish nature of killer. But he was a powerful, rich businessman just like Batman. He wrongly implicated this detective to perpetuate the record of most killing in a single day. But the detective avowed to stop him, and then this happens on that particular day. Welcome back to Paramount Recaps. I don't have many subscribers, but your single comment is a ray of hope to motivate me.
The movie kicks off with Callum Aldrich, a guy just doing his cleaning job at an office when he gets a call from a mysterious person. The caller threatens to expose some of Callum's private screenshots to his friends and family unless he gets to a specific location in 15 minutes. Freaked out, Callum races to the place, only to find a car crash site. The driver is lying on the ground, and the passenger seems trapped in the car. Panic, Callum calls 911. But then the driver, who is faking being hurt, jumps up, knocks out Callum, and kidnaps him. The next morning, the police arrive at the scene, led by Chief Inspector John Luther. His colleague, Martin, tells him that the passenger in the car is Sari Jones, someone who went missing 7 years ago. Luther quickly figures out that this wasn't just a random kidnapping, someone targeted Callum specifically. Luther then contacts Callum's mom, Corinne, and promises to find her son. Among the crowd of onlookers is David Roby, who seems worried that Luther's on the case. Turns out, David is the one behind the kidnapping. Knowing Luther could ruin his plans, David starts digging up dirt on Luther's past dirty cop activities, hoping to get him off the case. A few days later, Luther is dragged into court facing serious charges: intimidation, evidence tampering, and bribery. He ends up getting locked away in Hawksmoor maximum security prison. David, who is a wealthy trader and serial killer, is thrilled because now he can carry on with his twisted plans without Luther in the way. In prison, Luther is hated by the other inmates because many of them are there because of him, so they beat him up whenever they can. The movie jumps forward a few years. One day, Corinne gets a call and hears her son crying. She's given a location to meet him, and she rushes there without thinking. The place is an empty house, and inside, she finds a horrifying scene: dead bodies hanging from the ceiling, including Callum's. Other parents of missing kids arrive too, and it's clear the whole thing was a setup. Suddenly, the room is set on fire. Corinne spots a masked man watching her through a window before she barely escapes. Unfortunately, the other parents aren't so lucky. The next day, DCI Odette Rain takes over the case. After checking out the crime scene, she gathers her team and notes that the earliest murder happened 11 years ago, with the most recent one being just last year. She figures out that the killer has been planning this for a long time and assigns her team to find any connection between the murders that could lead them to the killer. Meanwhile, Luther, still in prison, gets an envelope with 65.8 written on it. He realizes it's a radio frequency and tunes in to hear a recording of Callum's last moment. The recording also includes David's voice, taunting Luther and admitting that he's the one who got him locked up. David dares Luther to try and stop him if he can. Corinne then visits Luther in jail, angry that he hasn't found her son's killer. Luther tries to explain, but she's not having it. As she leaves, it's revealed that David was the one who brought her there. Pretending to comfort her, Luther tries to get help from DCI Rain by telling her about the broadcast, but she refuses to work with a criminal. Instead, she orders her subordinate, Archie, to find and take away Luther's phone. With no other choice, Luther contacts his old friend Dennis and asks for help breaking out of prison. Before they can plan, prison guards confiscate Luther's phone. Later, Luther makes a deal with some prison guards to get transferred to a lower security prison, but they refuse, saying they can't change the system. So, Luther comes up with a plan to get the inmates to attack him, which will force the system to move him. That night, one of the prisoners causes a huge commotion, grabbing the attention of the control room officers. They manage to stop him, but suddenly, he knocks them out and escapes with a key, unlocking all the cells and causing chaos. During the riot, several inmates gang up on Luther, beating him brutally. Seeing the chaos, the guards finally decide to transfer him, just as he planned. As Luther is being moved to another prison, a black van intercepts the transport. It's Dennis and his men, who knock out the officers and rescue Luther. They take him to a garage, where Luther pays them for their help. Now free, Luther is determined to catch the serial killer. Meanwhile, Rain hears about Luther's escape and asks retired officer Martin to help since no one knows Luther better than him. Martin agrees and goes to the prison to check out Luther's belongings. longing. He finds the radio frequency and realizes that Luther's location can be traced by tracking it. Luther, meanwhile, follows the broadcast signal to a place where he meets a tattoo artist named Derek. Luther demands to know who used Derek's radio frequency, but Derek hesitates. After some intimidation, Derek admits that he was blackmailed by a man who had some private videos of him. Derek says he was given the transmitter through a courier and told to keep it on for 24 hours before getting rid of it. He also gives Luther a cell phone through which the blackmailer contacts him. With this info, Luther takes the phone and leaves just before the police arrive. Elsewhere, we see that David's team is spying on people all over the world. Having hacked into phones, cameras, and other devices, they use this info to blackmail people, forcing them to do whatever David wants. In the next scene, Luther contacts Martin and asks for help tracing a phone number. Martin reluctantly agrees and tells him that the location is Piccadilly Circus. Martin also informs Wherein, who then sends armed police to catch Luther and the serial killer. When Luther arrives at the location, he dials the number from Derek's cell phone, and David, who is there, answers it. Luther spots him immediately. With nowhere to run, David grabs a kid from the crowd and holds him at knife point. Smirking, he says this is just the beginning. Seconds later, several of his blackmailed victims start jumping off a nearby building, creating total chaos. So, the story kicks off with David seeing the chaos as the perfect moment to bolt towards the subway. Luther is hot on his heels, but the cops are chasing him too. Eventually, Luther catches up to David, and they get into a physical brawl. Luther manages to pin David down, but just as he's about to cuff him, a police officer shows up and tries to intervene. Luther begs the cop to cuff David first, but instead, the cop knocks Luther to the ground, giving David the chance to stab the officer and make a run for it. Luther quickly patches up the officer's wound before taking off himself. After escaping, David calls his mole, Archie, and chews him out for not warning him about Luther's prison break. When Archie can't give him a good reason, David threatens to leak some incriminating videos he has on him. Then, David checks in with one of his guys, Kachimov, to see how their plan is coming along. Kachimov sends him a video showing a group of teenagers they've captured. Meanwhile, Luther reaches out to Martin and asks him to put him on speakerphone. Luther then shares his theory about the pattern they've been trying to figure out. He explains that David has been blackmailing people by recording their private videos and then killing them. He also points out that nowadays, the fear of being exposed is way stronger than the fear of death. While they're talking, Wherein tracks Luther's location and sends a squad to catch him, but Luther senses something's up, so he smashes his phone and gets out of there. Later that night, Wherein calls her daughter, Anya, to remind her to go to bed on time since she won't be home because of work. With the girl alone, it's easy for David to break in and kidnap her. At the same time, Luther pays Corinne a visit to get more info on the killer. He thinks the murderer knew something secret about Callum, which is why Callum went to see him. Luther asks if Corinne has noticed anyone new in her life since Callum's death. She tells him about a guy named Tommy she met at a support group. It turns out that Tommy is actually David in disguise. Back at the police headquarters, Martin spots a pattern where at least 5 families have been approached by a man in his 40s over the years. The names are different, but the descriptions are similar. When they check the database, Wherein finds out David's real name. But before she can tell the team, David calls her and tells her about Anya. He then offers her a deal. He'll let the little girl go if Wherein brings Luther to him. Wherein contacts Luther and sets up a meeting at a restaurant. When they meet, she manages to subdue him and prepares to take him in. But Luther isn't one to give up so easily. He convinces her to team up by telling her that there are more kids like Anya who are in danger, and if they don't act fast, they'll be killed. With that, they start digging up more info on David and learn about his ex-wife, Georgette. Apparently, she cheated on him, and as punishment, he burned her face. Now, she's in a wheelchair, unable to move properly. Luther and Wherein visit Georgette at her place and ask for her help in catching David. She's hesitant at first, scared of what might happen if she talked. But when she hears about Whein's daughter, she reveals that David owns property in Norway. With this new lead, Luther and Wherein decide to head to Norway to rescue the captives. Before leaving, Luther calls Martin and asks for one last favor. Meanwhile, Archie finds out about Whein's trip and tells David. David realizes that Georgette has betrayed him and orders Archie to take her out. With no other choice, Archie sneaks into Georgette's house. But just before he can inject her with a lethal drug, Martin and the cops intercept him. This was the favor Luther asked for, knowing David would try to harm Georgette. Realizing he's cornered, Archie decides to end things on his own terms. Luther and Wherein finally arrive at David's snowy mansion in Norway. Inside, they find a bunch of mannequins and a girl hanging from the ceiling. Wherein, thinking it's Anya, breaks down and lashes out at Luther, telling him to leave her alone. Luther steps out and heads down to a secret underground bunker. Meanwhile, Wherein realizes that the body isn't Anya's, but before she can go after Luther, Kachimov ambushes her. In the bunker, David attacks Luther and chains him up. He starts a live stream called The Red Bunker, where he plans to torment his victims for his twisted followers to watch. David introduces Luther as a special guest, and shortly after, Wherein is brought in too, along with Anya, who's being held hostage. David tries to force Luther and Rain to hurt each other, but Luther, thinking fast, addresses the live audience and tells them that the police are tracking their IP addresses and are on their way. This scares the viewers, and they quickly log off, which enrages David. In a fit of rage, he leaves the room and locks the door with his phone. Luther seizes the moment, takes down a guard, and frees Rain. They manage to escape the room just before the door locks completely, leaving Rain, Anya, and Kachimov trapped inside. As the kerosene spray activates, signaling an impending fire, Rain pleads with Kachimov to unlock the door. Instead, he attacks her. A fierce fight breaks out, but Rain, despite being outmatched, manages to knock him out. Meanwhile, David tries to escape in his Jeep, but Luther jumps in too. They get into another intense fight, which causes the Jeep to crash into a frozen lake. David gets trapped under the ice and drowns. Luther, however, manages to use David's phone to unlock the bunker door, rescuing Rain and Anya just as his own strength is failing. He's about to pass out when police divers arrive just in time to save him. Back in London, Luther is rushed to the hospital. The news of the serial killer's death is all over the TV, bringing a bit of peace to Corinne. In the final scene, a high-ranking official visits Luther and offers him a job back at the police department.
Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel out. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss an update. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below with your suggestions for future videos, any questions you have, or just to say hi. Your feedback is super important to us and helps us create better content for you. Also, feel free to share this video with your friends, family, and on social media. It really makes a big difference and helps our community grow. You can follow us on Insert your social media handles for more updates and behind-the-scenes content. Thanks again for your support, and we'll see you in the next video.